Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Learning Beyond the Walls on the front lines of the future. My name is Ana Portnoy-Bremer. I'm the impact manager for the documentary Unseen by Seth Hernandez, and I'm honored to be the moderator for today's event. As for a description of my person and space, I have brown curly hair, a purple shirt, two nose piercings and glasses, and there's a blurry green background behind me. Documentary films don't just tell stories, they open up new ways of seeing our world. Today, we'll hear from the filmmakers of POV's The Ride Ahead and Emergent City, along with Elizabeth Jean-Pierre from Uprose, as we reflect on resilience, creativity, and the power to reimagine what's possible together. Together, we'll explore how these films shed light on systemic challenges and show us the ways young people and communities are redefining the future, as well as salvaging and creating new ways of producing knowledge and sharing experiences. And I'm delighted to introduce you all to our panelists for today's event. I'll start with Dan Habib. Dan Habib is the Inclusive Communities Project Director at the Westchester Institute for Human Development and founder of Like Right Now Films. His films include Intelligent Lives, including Samuel, Who Cares About Kelsey, and Mr. Connolly Has ALS. With his son Samuel, he co directed the Emmy winning short My Disability Roadmap and the feature The Ride Ahead. Habib has delivered a TEDx talk, Disabling Segregation, and served on President Obama's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities. Samuel Habib is the 25-year-old Emmy winning co director of My Disability Roadmap and The Ride Ahead, which he made with his father Dan. He works with Like Right Now Films and the Westchester Institute for Human Development while pursuing college studies. Samuel, who uses a wheelchair and communication device, brings his lived experience navigating disability and health challenges into his work and advocacy. Kelly Anderson is a Sunset Park based documentary filmmaker and chair of the Department of Film and Media Studies at Hunter College. Her films include Rabble Rousers, Francis Golden and the Fight for Cooper Square, My Brooklyn from America Reframed in 2012, Every Mother's Son from POV 2004 Tribeca Audience Award, and Out at Work. And finally, Elizabeth Dampier is an internationally recognized Puerto Rican climate justice leader of Black and Indigenous ancestry, born and raised in New York City. She serves as co chair of the Climate Justice Alliance and executive director of Uprose, Brooklyn's oldest Latino community based organization. A trailblazer in environmental justice, Elizabeth was the first Latina chair of the U.S. EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council and has been featured in the New York Times, Vogue, Time Magazine, and People en Español as one of the world's most influential voices on climate justice. What an honor to get to hear from you all and share the virtual stage. Thank you for being here. And before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our partners for co presenting today's conversation. That's Real Abilities, WXXI Move to Include Initiative, Urban Collective, and Uprose. And now, without further ado, let's turn it over to our brilliant panelists. And I'd like to start us off with a question intended for you all. And this first question is, what drew you to tell this story? What did you feel? Why did you feel it was urgent to make The Right Ahead an emergent city? And Kelly, can you start us off responding to that question? Kelly, you're on mute.
Thank you. So I'm a white woman with glasses and gray hair, and I'm wearing a white and black striped turtleneck. And so I moved to Sunset Park in Brooklyn about 15 years ago now, and I had just finished a film where I was really looking at the issue of gentrification and development in downtown Brooklyn, and sort of looking at my own role as a creative professional and how I could sort of grapple with to what extent I could actually help around the issues of these issues. And so when I moved to Sunset Park, I wasn't planning on making another film about gentrification at all, but I did meet some amazing people in the neighborhood, including Elizabeth, by screening that film and finding out what the neighborhood was dealing with. And Sunset Park is an amazing neighborhood. I love living there. It's an immigrant neighborhood. It's very economically thriving locally. It's just a beautiful neighborhood, and I was very aware, because of the work that I had previously done, that it was also, there was a threat to the people there from displacement, rental pressures. Everybody knows how expensive the rent is in New York. In Sunset Park, there's a lot of renters, and they are particularly vulnerable. And so this site called Industry City on the waterfront was bought by a new developer, and they started redeveloping it. And the first time I went there, I just felt immediately panicked about what was the impact that it was going to have on the neighborhood, because it was obviously attracting a whole different demographic to the neighborhood. Their advertising was, we're 30 minutes from Manhattan, we're cool, we're creative. And it was very obviously appealing to a demographic that I also felt kind of annoyed about, because it almost seemed like they were pitching to people like me to come to Sunset Park. And I knew that that was going to have a really negative effect on the neighborhood. So that's why my partner, Jay Sternberg, and I started filming. First, we did a short film for organizing in the community that some of the local advocates, including Uprose, could use. And then eventually, as time went on, I began to realize it was a much more complex and deep story that included gentrification, but also how precious and fragile our industrial waterfronts are when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis and the need to do all of the industrial work that we're going to need to get ourselves to deal with climate. And so, it became just a more complex story, and I was really just privileged to be able to be part of the community and documenting all of the conversations and all of the learning and all of the organizing and all of the deep conversations that the community had as they tried to address this giant development project that suddenly, happened in their midst.
Kelly, for such a rich and thorough response and telling us about what informed your process. And I'm wondering if we could pivot over to Samuel. Samuel, why did you make the ride ahead?
Hi everyone. Thanks for inviting us, and thanks to the POV team for organizing this event and to Anna for moderating the discussion. For accessibility purposes, I'll do a visual description. I'm a 25-year-old white man with brown hair and a beard, sitting in my wheelchair. I'm excited to talk with all of you. Disabled people should have their voices heard, and we should be able to tell our own stories. I don't like that movies and stories about disabled people are often about curing, or saving, or even killing the person because they have a disability. Or you will see someone with a disability have an average talent at something, and people will be, quote, inspired, and respond to the talent in a way they might not to someone that doesn't have a disability. We created this documentary and our impact campaign so that young adults with disabilities will feel more seen and heard, and find their own mentors. As someone who struggles to communicate, this film is incredibly meaningful to me because it is making my experience visible, and it is getting my voice, and others' voices, heard. Now that the film is being shared across the country through POV and PBS, and through our community screening campaign, I think it's going to help improve the world for disabled young people. I learned from my mentors that it's not easy to be an adult with a disability. Connecting with the disability community has helped me feel much more confident in myself, and more confident in my advocacy.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for sharing about the process, the richness also found in community and mentorship, And Dan, I'm wondering if you'd like to also respond to that question as co-director, co-producer of the film as well. What drew you to tell this story and to make The Ride Ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. So I'm Dan Habib. I'm a white man with a green sweater and not much hair left, sitting in my office here in New Hampshire with sunflower painting behind me. Um, Samuel summed up so much of the goals and our motivation for this. Unfortunately, the outcomes for young disabled adults transitioning into adulthood are not very promising statistically. You have incredibly high unemployment rates of maybe 60% unemployment rates. You have a poverty rate of about 1 out of 4 people. Very few people end up having opportunities to go to higher education and college. There's very little affordable, accessible housing for young adults with disabilities. So many live with their families. Their caregivers are in short supply. It's really hard to find, direct support professionals or afford them. I could go on and on with all the challenges. So, even though Samuel has a lot of support in his family and his community, still was facing a lot of those challenges. So we thought, what better way to help move the needle, hopefully, and amplify these issues than by having Samuel tell his own story. And in the film, The Ride Ahead, you see Samuel not only narrating much of the film and asking the questions of his mentors, but also shooting the film, a lot of it from his own perspective, with 2 cameras, one facing towards him, one facing out, and thereby capturing some really powerful moments of ableism also, including Joe Biden stroking his face at a campaign event, or a woman we call Airport Joe talking down to Samuel and just not being able to pivot and being able to talk to him like an adult, which is encounters that any person who uses a wheelchair or has a disability experiences pretty much every day. So not only did we want to tell Samuel's story from his point of view, POV, but we also wanted to make sure that every aspect of production was dominated by disabled people and led by disabled people. So we were really proud that the majority of our film and production team and outreach team are disabled people. And we made that commitment from the very beginning that the majority of our team would be disabled. So not only is it Samuel's own story of his disabled life moving into adulthood, but it's also being crafted by disabled people largely. So that's a lot of reasons that we felt like this was an urgent moment to tell this story.
Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing and also highlighting the importance of people who are behind the lens being also representative of the audiences and the protagonists also being featured. And I would love to pull Elizabeth in for another question here, and it's also open to Kelly, Samuel, and Dan. The title of today's conversation is Learning Beyond the Walls, right? So, how does your work in community organizing and how do your films interrogate and expand the idea of where and how learning happens? And Elizabeth, if you could start us off with that, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for inviting me into this program. And it is an honor to be in community with the rest of you. I am a descendant of extraction, colonialism, and enslavement. And so I work, live, and fight for a community that comes from the same kind of struggles. And so when Industry City, Jamestown decided that they were going to turn what we envisioned to be a path to a just transition into a destination location for the privileged, we began to organize, engage in community education, political education. We had direct actions. We had a sophisticated comms plan. We had a political strategy, and we had an alternative that was operational and that came from many, many years of community-based planning. Using this medium is tremendously important, particularly in a time of political and climate disruption where people are feeling hopeless and people are feeling like there is no way out of the multiplicity of affronts to their existence. And so this film and films like this platform makes it possible for people to understand that the creativity that comes from our ancestral traditions and our ancestral knowledge is really redefining how we move forward. And we do that in ways that are unpredictable. I think that this particular corporation decided to hire numerous public relations firms and really didn't know what they were dealing with. They thought that we were sort of these homogenized people that were okay with being paid to compromise, and we were not. we were really going to hold the line, because working at the intersection of racial justice and climate change means that you need to start looking at place differently, and you need to start looking at community and the assets that people bring to the redefinition of what power looks like also differently. And Sunset Park, as mentioned by Kelly, is this amazing community where people come from different parts of the global south, and they come from struggle. And what that means is that they have historically, intergenerationally endured a lot of threats. And so they are best positioned to articulate what the solutions are. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we are staffing those solutions. So the request to fight that fight came from the community directly to us. We didn't sit in our office and say, "Oh, what are we going to do for our people?" No, our people said to us, "No, you got to do this for us." And so we had we had the luxury and the honor for 7 years to fight. And so the fact that we can tell that story, and that we can use film as a way of sharing that all over the country and beyond, is a reminder that the answers are not in classrooms. The answers are not in the places that you expect. The answers are on the block, they're in the pueblo, they're in the community, they're in backyards. They are all around us. And those people who can't see because they have a very top-down patriarchal way of looking at power and possibility, are not taking advantage of the benefit of the brilliance that people in our community, our abuelas, our tias, the people who gave us life, the folks that are descendants of struggle, have the answers to how we move forward. So it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I'm just really excited that it's being shared here today, and that this film is changing the conversation about how we are walking in our power. I was really happy to follow Sam and Dan, because my mobility is limited, and I often complain about people wanting to see me as a victim, and I want to be seen in my power. And that's the same for our communities. People have deficit-based expectations of people who come from different kinds of challenges, and the truth is that there's power in that, and this film really brings that to life.
Much, Elizabeth, for all these crucial and empowering reminders and affirmations. And I'm wondering, Kelly, Samuel, and Dan, if you'd also like to respond to this question, and I can repeat it, right? The title of today's conversation is Learning Beyond the Walls. How do your films and or work in community organizing interrogate and expand the idea of where and how learning happens?
Well, oh, okay. Just to follow a little bit on Elizabeth, we often think that films teach in a very didactic way. Like we present information and then people watch and they get the information. And there is a lot of dense information, like these issues that the film is dealing with: land use, what's the process, who makes the decision, whose decision is binding, what is a zoning, they're very deep issues. And I think the film does try to unpack some of that. But I think what I feel really about the film is that the film is not teaching people anything. It's showing a community that is deeply engaged in hour after hour, hundreds of hours of meetings, hashing out a 3,000 page technical proposal and learning how to do that without any resources really to help them. And also working through their differences around how to move forward, because people had different ideas, not just about what they wanted to see happen, but how to get there. And I think that I have such deep respect for the way that the community really tried to work through those struggles. And I think it's instructive to people all over the country, whatever they're dealing with, that no, we're going to learn, we're going to base what we're doing in knowledge, we're going to collect our own information, we're going to look back at all the work that's been done previously, which is so important. And so to me, the film was sort of like documenting a process of learning, and then hopefully allowing people to continue to do that work using the film as a springboard going forward. So beyond the classroom, beyond the film, into the intersection of the film and the community.
My social and extracurricular life in school was just as important as academics. When I was in high school, I was part of the school TV station, the yearbook staff, and school newspaper. I was a member of the Be the Change Club. We organized multicultural events at the school and welcomed new Americans who moved to Concord. I played unified soccer, basketball, and track. I've advocated for more accessibility at my high school. I couldn't sit with my friends in the bleachers at the basketball games. I asked the principal and the athletic director to bring the student section down to the court. Then I was able to sit with my friends. But the city owns the football field and they are not very accessible. So I testified at the city council meeting and asked them to rebuild the football bleachers. I won't give up until the football stands are really wheelchair accessible. Even though I'm not in school anymore, I have friends in school who use wheelchairs, and I want them to have access to the whole school community.
Yeah, so as Samuel says, a lot of his learning happened outside of the classroom, which is kind of basically the title of this whole session, in the extracurricular activities, in the clubs, in social circles, and those all need to be made accessible and welcoming to all people. And actually, Samuel, through his advocacy some of which he just talked about, has become a mentor to a lot of people, a lot of younger kids with disabilities in our community of Concord, New Hampshire. And one thing that I really took from making this film was the incredible importance of mentorship. Bodhi as a mentor, right? Yep. Thinking of people that are in our community that he's mentored, right? And I'm thinking, Samuel, about the role of mentorship, and how watching Samuel have interviews with these incredible mentors in the film, including the queen of all mentors, Judy Heumann, who's an incredible disability rights leader who passed away sadly in March of 23, but was a big part of this project. That's, for me, crystallize how much you can learn outside of the classroom, outside of schools, just by having conversations with mentors, with people that you care about. So that was something that I think we really were very very much part of the process of making this film was the beauty of mentorship and these conversations.
Of you for responding so generously to these questions. And actually, Dan, I'm wondering if I can rope you back in. This question is specifically for you. In the spirit of knowledge acquisition outside of traditional sites of instruction, could you tell us about meaningful learnings and takeaways that you gained from the experience of making this film?
Yeah. Well, it was quite the profound experience making a film with Samuel, because he's my son, and so I'm not exactly objective about about his life. But I think different people have to be given the space to communicate and share their stories in their own way. And in Samuel's case, that can literally mean sitting together here in our office for hours at a time as Samuel very methodically speaks out his truth and his perspective. And that's, I think, something that was a huge takeaway. Is I've always tried to put people's voices front and center, and tried to, as a documentarian, I've been doing documentary work for 40 years in different capacities, and I've always tried to center the experience of the people that I'm working with. It used to be called the subjects, or maybe the participants, but I think there's another level you can take it to sometimes, and really give these people a sense of power over their story, and give Samuel a sense of authenticity and of patience to let him tell his story in his own way, in his own time. Not, and it doesn't mean you don't have other people working on it and saying, well, maybe try the narration in this way, or doing some coaching. Film is a team effort, right? It's always a very collaborative team artwork, and there's no doubt about that. But we made sure that Samuel's voice was always the primary voice in this film, and his decisions were always the primary decisions. And just to learn what an active process that was, more than I've ever done before, was, I think, a really profound takeaway.
Thank you so much, Dan and Samuel. To continue on the topic of learnings, when considering learnings you've gained beyond the walls, what advice do you have for school leaders and future educators to create spaces that value and include all students?
My advice to school leaders is, don't segregate. Create a sense of belonging. Have high expectations for all students. Make the entire building and extracurricular activities accessible. All of my schools have been inclusive, and that made a big impact on my education and my work now as a filmmaker.
And I'll just say briefly, Samuel, we present to a lot of school groups as part of our work. We do a lot of presentations and impact. And Sam will just crystallize it. Don't segregate, have high expectations, make everything accessible, create a sense of belonging. It's simple but really profound messages for school leaders.
Absolutely. And I hope all the audience members are taking notes from all of this conversation. And I'd love to pivot now, actually, to Kelly and Elizabeth. So, Emergent City highlights how communities imagine and build alternatives to dominant urban systems. So, what can this teach us about the role of collective knowledge creation and learning? And I'll pivot to Kelly first, and I can repeat the question again afterwards for you, Elizabeth. So, Kelly, you're on mute.
Sorry, keep doing that. What Emergent City shows is just how important it is for communities to come together and create their own visions of what they want their neighborhoods to be, and then go engage in a process. It's a visioning process. It's also a mapping process of knowing what your neighborhood is, who's there, what's the history, what's the zoning, who controls different aspects of the decision making. And so what the film shows is just this incredibly intense and but important process that neighborhoods can go through. And I think people just need to feel empowered, instead of seeing the city change around them. So many people, I hear them say like, oh my God, I don't like the way the city's changed. It's so corporate now. Or, like after, about 10 years ago, after Michael Bloomberg was towards the end of Michael Bloomberg's term in office, people were looking around the city going, oh my God, what happened? Well, what happened were 100 rezonings that completely reshaped the city. And so I think for me, I just want people to feel empowered by the knowledge of how the land around them, why things change and how they change, and understand how they can have an impact on that change. And then harness that so that they can fight for a vision. And it's also a political problem too, right? Because even if you know what you want, there's all these obstacles to getting there. And, for that, you need to just put pressure on electeds and keep trying really hard to make government be responsive the way that it's supposed to be. And people will always say, no, we can't afford it. Or if it doesn't balance out, if we can't bring in a lot of, luxury housing to pay for this other thing that you want, then we can't do it. I think it's really important for communities to say, no, we're not playing by those rules. There's plenty of other money that we can bring. We tax people, we have lots of money, we spend on other things. And I think that, a lot of it is just sort of increasing the ability to imagine outside of the box that we're in, which is really about really capitalism.
Yeah, the big problem, the big C
God,
word.
I can't hear. Can you hear me?
Elizabeth, can you hear us? We can hear you. Yeah.
I'm gonna get out and come back in again.
Okay, we'll pivot back to Elizabeth in a bit.
Okay, I want to respond to that question. Is it possible?
Oh my God, yes. Did you catch it, or
Okay,
should I read it to
I
you
caught the
again?
question. I just was afraid to do anything because of the problem with the tech.
No problem. Please go
Um,
ahead.
so I think it's important to move with an operational vision. And it's not, it can't just be aspirational, it has to be operational. And a lot of communities like to say no, but they don't have anything in the alternative to offer. And Uprose really staffed the community by doing workshops on land use, on ULURP, on rezoning, really provided the community with all the tools so that they could decide how they wanted to move forward. But our response to this development didn't come out overnight. It came from close to 12 years of community-based planning and the community being clear about what they wanted. They wanted a green reindustrialization. They wanted an industrial waterfront that didn't just provide toxic exposure, but would create a path to a just transition, to climate adaptation, to mitigation, to resilience. And that also happens while us attempting and successfully passing state legislation, the most aggressive climate legislation in the country, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, so that we would have the resources to fund this vision. And so it was really really a sophisticated plan, and so I don't want people to think that saying no is enough. Saying no is something that developers are ready for. They're going to put us out as the people who say no and whose ideas are sort of pie in the sky and not operational. It's necessary for the community to be really clear about what they want and how they're going to do it. It's important to build alignment and consensus. And it's also important to know how to manage all of the conflicts that emerge when something like this happens. We were this organization that was anchoring the issue and anchoring the research and doing the work for the community. But a lot of different groups popped up as a result of that. And the developer threw a lot of money at the community to create division and to create confusion, and made the community think that if they didn't compromise and they didn't agree to their terms, that they weren't going to get anything. And so doing that kind of research, being able to collect that data, building strategic partnerships and not compromising is really important. Everyone, wants to be a leader. And the truth is that leadership is something, one, that you aren't, and two, that it comes with transparency and accountability. And so it was a moment that really challenged the community, and people were attempting to use the struggle for a lot of different reasons that really had nothing to do with the needs of the collective. It became an opportunity. And when there are struggles like this, opportunism just sort of rises really fast. So, sort of being true to honoring the community voice, staffing the community in the way that they're asking for, getting the resources that they need to hold that moment, regardless of all the noise that is created externally, I think is really important. And so this was a victory, a collective victory, because people picked up different strands, different pieces, came to it with different kinds of levels of energy. And so what you see is a collective response. But at the base of that, at the foundation, was the fact that they were getting information that they trusted, that our organization's been in the community next year 60 years, that we have deep roots, and that we were able to work 24/7 to make sure that the community could lead with information that they could count on. And then I just can't undermine the fact that we were doing community-based planning for so many years, that we were really clear about the direction that we wanted, and that this was a plan that wasn't just aspirational, but that it was operational. They had like 5 public relations firms, and they couldn't get around our comm strategy. They had tons of money, and they couldn't get around our direct actions and our, literally like banner drops, the kinds of things that we did. We were incessant. People use the word resilient, and we reject that word because it means bouncing back to the past as if that was ever normal for us. We talk about persistence. We were relentlessly persistent. And so there's a lot of that that's weaved into that film. And so I think it's really important. I hope I answered your question, because I kept losing sound.
You absolutely did. Such a meaningful response and such important strategic and grassroots work and learnings. Thank you for sharing those, Elizabeth. Samuel, I would love to pivot back to you. The mentors you interview, beyond the walls, right, give powerful advice. Is there one piece of advice that you've most taken to heart that may benefit other young adults with disabilities?
The advice I got from one of my mentors in the film, Maysoon Zaid, was, "You are not alone. Find your community." That was powerful advice because I've always had a strong community, starting with Beaver Meadow Elementary School and right through Concord High School. I'm continuing to find my community at my summer job at a concert venue, at work at the Westchester Institute for Human Development, in the disability justice community, and in my hometown of Concord, New Hampshire.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for responding to that question so honestly and generously. Dan, I am also wondering if I can pivot to you. The film emphasizes intergenerational collaboration. How do you see youth, allies, and community elders working together to create change? What learning opportunities do you feel reside in those exchanges?
No, thank you, Anna. And I think, kind of like Elizabeth talked about earlier, about the opportunities for leadership is really important. And And Samuel has really brought me into this disability community for the last 25 years of our life together since he was born. And in doing this film is kind of a microcosm, I think, for that, as you say, that intergenerational work. Not only what you see on screen, which is Samuel interviewing, incredible young and youngish and older, across intergenerational advocates, from people like Andrew Peterson, who's in his mid to late 20s, all the way to Judy Heumann and Bob Williams in their 70s. But also the people who advised us were young adults. We actually created an advisory board early on in the film of 6 incredible disabled young adults from around the country who would watch cuts of the film, who would give us input on scripts, who worked on our educational materials, and they were paid for their time as well. And we also, even our core crew, our impact producer Rosemary, our co-producer Erica, our social media manager Kylie, are all half my age, and much closer to Samuel's age than my age. And I think we've tried hard to create leadership opportunities and opportunities for initiative and growth and creativity for all these people. And I think that that's just within our film process, but that has to happen in nonprofits, that has to happen in politics, that has to happen in education, that has to happen in the business world, that people who have power, and I would say I have power as a producer, has been doing this a lot of years, have to let go and spread that power around and create opportunities. That's our responsibility. And I can't say I always do it perfectly, but it's definitely a goal that I try to do, to let go. And listen, I think we can all agree, some of us can be, especially in the film world, kind of micromanagers. We want every detail to be just so, right? I see some nodding heads, but we have to let go sometimes and understand that sometimes people will do it differently than we would, but it might be more interesting. And you got to give them the space and the opportunity to take risks and not be afraid of failure. And that's a very proactive process. It's not a passive process.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing about the importance of leaning into those intergenerational collaborations and relationships. And I'd love to pivot back to Kelly and Elizabeth. So, Emergent City shows how everyday people, often marginalized, are reimagining cities. What does it mean for communities to be teachers of new possibilities? I welcome either of you to jump in as you feel.
Elizabeth, do you want to start on that one?
Sure, sure. I loved that you were talking about intergenerational relationships, because community is intergenerational and power is intergenerational. This is a country that pits generations against each other. But in the global South and the places that we come from, power is intergenerational. We learn across the table from each other. We learn across generations. I think that I lost my train of thought. Oh my God, I had an elder moment. Was the question again?
Often marginalized
Yes.
are reimagining cities. Should I complete it for you, or do you want to
No, I'm
pick up on
good.
your
I'm
train of
good.
thought? Okay,
I'm
go for it.
good. It was just that I was listening to Sam and Dan so intently that I lost my way.
Happens to me
But
too. Please go ahead.
but um but yeah, I mean, literally people know what they want, and they sometimes need some support in trying to figure out how they get there. But they know what they want. There is nothing, when people talk about, for example, recycling and reuse and repurposing, well, there's nothing like a person in need, someone who comes from struggle, who can tell you how to do that, because that is what's defined their life, being able to repurpose and reuse. And the truth is, about people in community, if you're living next to a power plant, you know that you have a chance of getting upper respiratory disease and asthma if you're living next to the Gowanus Expressway. And so people will talk about what is necessary to remediate that. If you have a backyard and you get up in the morning and you put out a white long lounge chair, and at the end of the night it is black, you know that that soot is also in your lungs. And so people know what the problems are. They know the correlation between their health disparities and the siting of environmentally burdensome infrastructure. And they also know that there are solutions and that those solutions are operational. That's true also with envisioning the kind of life that they want to lead and what they need in order to live it. We're living right now in a time when we're going to have to start talking about living with what we need instead of what we want, because of extreme weather events, because of disruption, and because the future, really, in terms of climate change, doesn't look positive. But Folks who come from struggle, people who have had to live that way, know how to live that way, and they have a lot to teach us. And so often people think that the solutions are coming from the grass tops, from the people who are most educated. My grandmother did not know how to read and write, and she was probably one of the sharpest people that I've known. There are people that I've met who've been in the prison system who can do circles around lawyers. And an education, a formal education, doesn't necessarily mean that you're the sharpest crayon in the box. So it does require tremendous amounts of respect and humility uh, in front of the people who never had the opportunities that we did to have access to a formal education, not just to listen, but to also turn what you're hearing into actions and honoring and respecting their leadership. That takes a different kind of leadership. I'm a lawyer, and I'm the first in my family to go to college and to go to law school. And I know that when I walk in a room, people are more likely to defer to me for that reason. But I need to put that in check. And I don't come from privilege, but I need to say, no, I need to hear from you. And then I will use my access to a formal education to facilitate and to make sure that I am using those skills to advance your vision. And so we're asking everyone to do that and to recognize that. And this is also how we've lost this moment. We've lost this moment by being elitist and exclusive and top down and patriarchal. We need to be matriarchal, leaderful, and intergenerational if we're really going to engage community in the way that they deserve to be engaged. And just recognize that they have the answers and they know exactly what is needed. And if we've had the benefit of having access to an education, our responsibility is to honor our ancestors, the people who fought so that we would have access to an education, to help elevate that and move that forward. But not to supplant and not to duplicate the work that they are doing, but to elevate and support. That's how you build alignment, and that's how you honor the collective spirit. And also, the other cool thing, I think, and I have to say this, is the diversity. The fact that in Sunset Park, you've got Asian folks who know how to grow things, Mexican folks who know how to fix things, Puerto Ricans who know how to dance. We're the ones who bring the joy. I'm just going to, we have to embrace joy every time. But in the collective, the brilliance really redefines what the future looks like. And the vision comes from that collective. So I think we're good as long as we approach this work with respect and humility, and we honor our ancestral traditions.
If you picked up on your train of thought right again so beautifully, Kelly, would you like to expand upon that?
I don't have too much to add. I'll just say in the documentary space, I think it's the same, approach with respect, with, take time to make good relationships with people and to try to work ethically. And also, instead, often we just sort of fall into representing these very individual stories of tragedy or, to get away from just like the individual empathy lens and move into a collective storytelling that's about systemic problems and collective solutions. I think it's very challenging because our whole form for the last maybe 30, 40 years has been very focused on individual stories. And I think that, balancing that out with a look at the whole is really important.
Role of solidarity. Elizabeth, I actually quickly want to pivot back to you because I would love to specifically ask a question about Uprose. So, Uprose's work centers climate justice and community leadership. So, how does that perspective inform how you approach storytelling and partnership within Emergent City and beyond?
Well, the organization, was founded during the Civil Rights Movement in 1966. And around 1996, sort of pivoted into becoming an intergenerational environmental justice organization because young people came and said that that's what they wanted. And so the story is really kind of central to Emergent City because, people are thinking that we're talking about displacement. But what we're talking about is strengthening social cohesion. And strengthening social cohesion is what is going to make it possible for us to survive extreme weather events, pandemics, all kinds of things. The fact that we are in community with each other, that we're looking out for each other, that we are sharing food, that we're sharing ideas, that we're doing art builds and we're engaged in creativity. All of that really comes from building community and building trust over the years. And that we're accountable, that people can come and ask us questions that even change the direction that we're going in if they don't think if they don't think that our direction is honoring their vision. So it is central. I think the fact that we are an anchor in the community, a historical anchor in the community, and that a call or a text or somebody hitting me up on Facebook saying, Mija, you have to do something about Industry City. I remember that call and thinking, what do you want us to do? They're like, oh my God, this is a zoning fight. You're going to have to help us and provide us with the support. And sort of it started from there. We were literally just doing a block to block organizing effort around how to prepare our community for the next extreme weather event, when all of a sudden we had to stop what we were doing to start learning more about zoning and figuring out politically how we were going to advance this. And so all of that, our fingertips tips are all over that. And what I think is really important is that victory becomes the platform that brings in offshore wind and thousands of jobs. And I remember the owner of Industry City saying to me as we were doing the ribbon cutting for offshore wind, saying, is this what you imagined? And I said, yes. And he said, I didn't see it. I said, we did. We saw an opportunity for green manufacturing. We saw an opportunity for the kind of industrial sector that would grow climate jobs, that would pay our community well and prevent both residents and small businesses from being displaced, that would provide a supply chain that would benefit the local community and the region, something visionary and operational. And so it was, and now today, as we're speaking, the meetings are being held to talk about how do we engage in a just transition? How do we move from an extractive economy that has been harming our community to one that is about a regenerative economy where we're dealing with renewable energy, drinkable water, wellness, food sovereignty, those kinds of things? That conversation cannot be had if the community hadn't had a collective vision and it started or it grew from that fight against Industry City. Industry City posed such a threat. If you know anything about Brooklyn, you know that Williamsburg lost almost 40% of its Latino community in 10 years. And so the industrial sector was just killed. And people like saying that industrial work is dead. But you know what isn't? What isn't dead is climate change. And what isn't dead is imagination and the opportunity to turn a sector that has done harm into something that is regenerative and that helps. And so everyone, how could you look away and how could you not support a plan that was about a future that was completely operational? That, I think, is sort of the drive in Emergent City, that people see the connection between an industrial sector and their survivability and their ability to thrive in the face of disruption. So I think that's an important part of the story, because it wasn't traditional. It wasn't like we were fighting for housing on the industrial waterfront. We were fighting for industrial retention, and we were fighting for an industrial sector that was going to address future needs for New York City, for Sunset Park, and for the region, and that would prevent us from being displaced. And that is visionary and really highly sophisticated, that people could see the relationship between that. And our responsibility was to say yes and roll our sleeves up and bring in all the partners that we needed to make sure that we would win. And then the one thing that I do want to say is that when to remind us who we are, because they had so many resources, they lost so much money fighting us. And they reached out to elected officials that were beyond our community, to Richie Torres in the Bronx and Richard Donovan. And it was a moment where we were reminded, oh my God, we're movement leaders. We've got people too. You're going to reach out to the Bronx. Oh my God, we've got people too, and we're not alone. We are part of a bunch of movement formations, because we are movement leaders. We literally are the descendants of the civil rights movement. And so being able to recognize that we have people and that we're not alone, and that we can create these strategic partnerships and recognize when you don't know something. That's the other thing. When I talk about humility, it's important for us to recognize when we don't know something. And identify those people who do and be comfortable with having such a big table that you're bringing knowledgeable people to that table, and you don't think you have to be everything to everybody and know everything. We need to know everybody, but not know everything. I think that is difficult sometimes for organizations or people that are led by ego to say, you know what, I don't know that. I can't figure it out. Maybe somebody else does. We're so hooked into shine and celebrity that we never ask the question, who needs to be here so that we can fill all the gaps and move forward in a way that that really is sophisticated and multi-layered. That was something we did and do constantly because you have to lead with humility. And so we were able to bring a collective of women who were experts in land use and zoning, and they were able to give the community vision life. So yeah, I could go on forever. With 7 years of our life, I know I grew gray hair, but it is an example that communities are not the people who say no; they're the people who say, "What about this? We can do this. This is operational, and we have resources." And then I guess the last thing I'll say is that we need to stop thinking like capitalists about resources. We need to start thinking that we need, particularly in a time where we're going to see fewer resources, we need to start thinking creatively about creating the kinds of strategic relationships and partnerships that make it possible for us to build the capacity to take on big fights like these, because the money's not always going to be there, but the threat always will. It always has. And so we can't just stop and say no and have people roll over us just because the resources aren't there. We are the resource, and collectively we have resources.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We only have time for one more question, and I would love to pivot over to Samuel and Dan to start us off, but it's for all four of you. So I wanted to ask, right, what do you all hope students, educators, and communities take away from watching The Ride Ahead and Emergent City? Samuel, please go ahead.
My goal for the film is that people won't talk down to disabled people. I want everyone to know that disabled people demand respect and rights. And I want other young adults with disabilities to have the same opportunities that I've had for healthcare, inclusive education, college, assistive technology, jobs, making friends, advocacy, and independent living. I hope parents who will watch this film will see that they should include their kids in everything, like my family has done. And I hope schools and colleges who watch this film will commit to include disabled students alongside their non-disabled peers. All of my schools have been inclusive, and that made a big impact on my education, and led to my life now as a filmmaker. Our film will let people learn from disability role models about how to live a full life with a disability as they transition to adulthood. This film will help people understand how to talk to me and other people with communication challenges. Young people with disabilities who have seen the film so far have told me that they have the same questions as I do about dating, sex, moving out of their own family's home, how to respond when people talk down to them, work, and college. That means a lot to me.
And I'll just very briefly add that having the film on POV was incredible, and it's reached so many millions of people. But the work continues. We have to get this into the hands of people all over the country. So we have a lot of initiatives for the next couple of years to get the film out to summer camps and programs, schools, so that they can put the film to work. So that the work continues for sure for all of us.
And Kelly, Elizabeth, love it if you could give us some final responses on that question.
Just very briefly, I hope that people take away that community is beautiful. It's complex. It's not one thing. People don't always agree, but democracy is showing up, even when it's hard, and having those hard conversations. And that, as Elizabeth was saying, there's a lot of knowledge just right there. And I think it's respect that and just do the work.
Elizabeth, would you like to close us off?
Sure. I would just say that from Puerto Rico to Guam, grassroots led organizations have solutions that are operational, and that young people should do some landscaping and find out who they are and how they can add. People are always open, and intergenerational power is what's necessary to move this collectively. And so it's not an idea of like starting your own thing or duplicating efforts, but look for what's there and make a phone call and say, how can I serve and how can I add value and do work that is complementary? And we are always open for that kind of love.
Thank you so much, Dan, Samuel, Kelly, and Elizabeth, for such a rich, layered, and meaningful conversation on learning beyond the walls. We are nearing the end of our event, so we'd like to make sure to point you all in the direction of the films, The Ride Ahead and Emergent City, which you can watch via streaming on PBS Passport and the PBS app, respectively. Finally, we want to thank our panelists once again for their insightful offerings, our co presenters, Real Abilities, WXXI Move to Include Initiative, Urban Collective, and Uprose for their support, and all of you with us here today for your presence and engagement. Make sure to continue following POV American Documentary for more conversations. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. It was an honor.
It was great to be with you all today. We'll keep you posted on the ride ahead.
Thank you,
Ah,
everyone.